All right, well, welcome back to another episode of How to Make Money with Hard Money. And today we are joined by our good friend, attorney David Phillips. So we're really excited to have David on the show today. We have done everything together from originating loan documents, selling and buying real estate, joint venture agreements, equity sales, and everything in between. So really excited to share you with the audience today. So welcome to the show, David.
Well, thank you guys for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, so we wanted to start with letting the audience just get to know you a little bit. So
Sure.
maybe we can start with, where you're from, how you got into real estate.
Absolutely. Yeah. I told David and Caleb my least favorite topic. So happy to talk about myself for a few minutes, but then we'll move on into more important and interesting things.
That's right.
No, I've lived in Clearwater my whole life. My folks moved down here from New York when I was about 6 months old. Grew up here, went to Stanford undergrad and Florida State Law. Started practicing law in 2009, so just about 15 years ago now, and hard to believe that. But I started to realize early on when I was practicing that I liked real estate. There were a lot of different areas of law that people my age graduating with me from law school were moving into, and I just gravitated toward real estate. I had no background in it necessarily. I just found it interesting. I found it something I could grasp. It was tangible assets I could understand, and the concepts were things that interested me. So that was kind of how I focused on real estate as a young lawyer. I did not really have a lot of background in law, to be honest. I was not a law student who knew, at age 10 that I was going to be a lawyer one day. I had no lawyers in the family.
You didn't have that actual moment. Everyone says that parents.
Father was in medical, right?
Yeah.
My father was in medicine, and my mom was a nurse as well. So I had a lot of medical background in the family. I personally did not see myself pursuing medicine, and I realized that relatively early. And just for a variety of reasons, hard shoes to fill. My dad having charted this course for himself, and I realized quickly I would not be able to fill his shoes. And so I started looking at other opportunities, and I actually didn't know till after college that the law was where I'd end up.
Okay. So didn't go to undergrad with the intention of
I studied science in undergrad, and I was thinking for a period of time that I would either go into some type of scientific field, research, or potentially medicine.
Okay.
So I took a pre-med track and stuck to that for 3 years.
Wow.
With undergrad. But I also focused a little bit on earth science, marine biology. I just always enjoyed that. I grew up doing a lot of competitive sailing, so I was on the water a lot as a kid, and I really enjoyed the ocean. And
you were out in the ocean all the time.
Exactly. So focus a little bit on that as well in some of my coursework. But I think the moment that I realized I'd probably focus on law was after college when I took a job. I worked in New York City working for the district attorney's office.
Okay.
And the district attorney at the time was a legend. He had been in the position for, I think, over 40 years, maybe 30 years, but by the end of his career, I think close to 40.
Okay.
And his name was Robert Morgenthau, and he was a legend. He was, from what I understand, the show Law and Order was based on his tenure.
Oh, nice.
So he was the head DA.
That's great tutelage, right?
And and I worked for his office in New York, and really, that's the moment that I can pinpoint where I realized, I could enjoy this. Now, the courtroom, I realized once I started practicing, was not where I wanted to spend my time.
Yeah, because you're not in the courtroom day to day.
I'm more of an office lawyer. I call myself an office lawyer. But I realized in that role that I enjoyed the study of practicing law and learning the concepts. The thing about law that interested me early on is that it was always evolving.
Yeah.
That it never stays the same, even though there are certain concepts that do remain throughout your career. The law evolves. So there's case law, the statutes change, the legislature changes the law for you. So there are things that you have to learn on an ongoing basis, and it keeps you on your toes.
There's been a big technology push that we'll kind of talk about a little bit today, because I'm
Absolutely,
curious just to ask that question about, technology from when you
Absolutely.
started to now, but we can come back to that. So when you got into real estate law specifically, now talk to us a little bit about PHL firm. And, I know you
Yeah.
have two offices, one's in Clearwater, one's in St. Pete.
Exactly.
I know you do a couple things. It's not just, I know personal injury, you have your partners, Ty and Michael, right?
Yes. So I started at a firm here in Clearwater that had two offices in Tampa and Clearwater. So we were what I would call a regional firm. I spent 3 or 4 years there, and then went off on my own.
Yep.
And
So that was before PHL.
that was before we started our firm.
Yep.
And then worked on my own for a few years and built my practice, focusing on real estate at that point.
Yeah.
And then my two partners joined me 2018, I want to say.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was like 2 years or so after we started. I believe it or not, we've been working together for like 9 years now.
Yeah,
A long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's time has flown.
2024,
Time
9
has
years.
flown. Yeah. So I think 2018 is when we started our firm. And we have not looked back since then. So my partners litigate. They are courtroom lawyers, if you will. They spend most of their time arguing motions and going to trial and things like that.
And Ty helps us with the defaults and specifically for DKC lending.
Yes, exactly.
Great
So
combination.
we're a full service firm in the sense that we can handle everything from, in a real estate transaction, let's say, from the closing and document prep all the way through, repossession, foreclosure, those things.
Yep.
We don't do certain things. We don't do a lot of estate planning work. We don't do criminal law. There are certain things that some firms focus on more heavily than we do, but we are full service.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So one of the things that, I wanted to ask is Florida itself in real estate is not an attorney state, or you don't have to have an attorney to do your real estate transactions, but we find it imperative. What would you tell people is the most important thing about having an attorney represent you in these real estate transactions?
That's a great question. And it comes up a lot, especially since more and more people are moving down from, Illinois, New York, these states where they do have attorneys mainly driving the transactions. Florida, there's always been a significant focus on title agents being able to write title insurance, which we can get into a little bit more throughout the podcast here. But some states require that an attorney write those policies.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think to your point, Florida is a little bit, I call it the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
So you have title agents who usually there's an attorney on staff, may or may not always be reviewing the work product.
Mm-hmm.
And we've run into this, and we can talk about some specific instances if you want, where we've seen issues. Maybe a title agent has done things wrong or incorrectly, and it can cause significant delays.
Mm-hmm.
It can cause issues down the road. So the repercussions are significant. But I don't think we'll ever become a title or an attorney state from a title perspective. I just think there's too much of a lobby from the title field, that will prevent that from happening. But that does not prevent any individual borrower or lender or anyone in real estate, an investor, from hiring a lawyer to review their documents or requiring that they work with one on any of their closings, frankly.
Yeah.
And for us at DKC, it's became a policy that we obviously are using an attorney on every transaction for that reason. And I mean, from a market perspective, we can talk a little bit about when, after post-COVID, when we had this real estate boom and, everybody was very busy, real estate was hot. Title companies had a lot of business too. They were trying to staff up and not to crap on any title companies. Everybody was doing their best at the time. But when you're moving fast and there's a lot of transactions and you're not an attorney reviewing title commitments, there was a lot of errors. And some of these errors you don't find until a year, 2, 3 years after when you pull title again.
Correct.
Refinancing when you're doing
and you're refinancing or selling.
That's right. There's normally a lag to your point, David, because, exactly what you said, the industry picks up. The brokers are busy. There's opportunities for brokers to start title agencies. I've seen this a few times now with the cycles, in the 15 years I've been practicing. And so the title agencies pop up.
Yep.
And then those have to be staffed by, by closers, by processors, by people in the industry.
Yeah.
Some of them don't have the experience that they should. And then unfortunately, a few years later is when you'll start seeing the claims.
Right.
That's what I've noticed. There's a few year lag.
Yeah.
And you may notice it when you go to sell or when you go to refinance your property, because all of a sudden you'll be dealing with an issue that was not handled properly at your closing, and you would have never known about it.
Exactly.
There's no red flag that will be raised until
after
that situation arises.
What would you say, yet again, for more people out there listening, are more of the common errors in title that people just miss and they should really be aware?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, some that I can think of off the top of my head are, incorrectly signing deeds. And what I mean is,
We see that a lot.
there has to be some certain language in a conveyance. The deed has to show whether it's your homestead property or whether it's not, if it's an investment property. If it doesn't state that specifically, we have to assume it's the homestead in Florida. So if we don't have a non-homestead provision on that deed, you can't assume it's not their homestead. And then if it's owned individually, that would mean that the spouse would have to execute it as well.
Okay.
So we see that's a common error that title agents will make. The other error we see all the time are lack of proper notarization or witnessing. That's more rare. That's relatively well known. But then, a lot of times with the new electronic notarization that we have in Florida, that can be a problem. The remote notarization, if people aren't properly having things remotely notarized.
Right.
And the world we live in now, unfortunately, everybody's moving toward electronic signatures.
Yeah.
We are definitely behind the times in the real estate world.
Yeah.
And I have some personal thoughts on that. I don't think it will be a long time, in my opinion, before we get to the point where deeds and mortgages are fully electronically signed.
Right.
Yeah.
There's too much risk of fraud.
Yeah.
And we've seen it.
We've seen a lot of that fraud.
We've seen
the deed fraud right now.
It's starting to become more prevalent.
Well, just think of AI and how it helps and aids with the ability to commit fraud.
Yeah. If I could, I'll just kind of lay out what that fraud can look like at times, especially with deeds. And, we see it a lot in Southeast Florida, of course. Miami's certainly a hotbed for this.
And David has helped save this on many
David has helped save us a couple times.
For making big errors. Big errors.
Yes, my God. If we could do a couple podcasts on all the times David saved us. But so what these fraudsters look for is they'll look for free and clear properties that don't have mortgages and they're worth value. And so they'll go and try to procure a refi. They'll deed the property over, or fraudulent quitclaim deed or something like that.
Yeah.
And they have the deed. We've seen people that have deeds, driver's license, passports, articles, operating agreements. They've, completed an entire package that's fraudulent. They go to refinance with a lender and they try to refinance and put a mortgage on a property that's not theirs. And then they walk away with the cash, right? If they get the closing.
Yeah. What they did is exactly right. They prey on the weak title agent. If you think of it like that, it's almost like the animal kingdom, right? The lion on the savannah attacks the weak gazelle.
Right.
It doesn't go for the strong one that can outrun it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So they know. And
what is a weak title company?
Well, they look for inexperienced title agents, I think. I don't know exactly how they target them. I don't know how they find them, but there's got to be a way.
And even the underwriters, right? Or like the underwriters.
They know which underwriters are a little bit less vigilant with their requirements and the requirements they impose on their agents.
You think like newer title companies too that have haven't been around as long?
It could be that. Yeah, I think that's probably right. I don't know enough about the history of some of the underwriters to speak directly to it, but I think that's probably exactly what it is. They find over time the weakest link and then they exploit that.
Yeah.
And if they can get an agent to do things that are maybe cutting corners here or there, they're able to exploit that.
The notary, even like that whole notary situation, I think is important because we had one case specifically where, it was a $800,000 property, $400, $500K loan, I think it was, and it got stopped right before the wire was sent actually.
Yep.
And This one, the deed was fraudulent. There was
Yeah.
cashier's checks. There was, I mean, the fraud was
It was lengthy.
was a really high level, right?
Yeah.
And so,
And we caught it just because of the fact of the middle initial or the middle signature was different than the original one that the original seller signed.
and
The
sorry,
name.
the point too that I was going to make was the notary, right? Because when we require the title company to initiate the notary and be responsible for setting the notary appointment. And in this case, a lot of borrowers, if they're trying to commit fraud, they may try to, provide their own notary.
Right.
Hey, don't worry about it. I have a notary in my office. I'll have her notarize
exactly,
the documents. And then the title company didn't send that notary. And
Right.
that's another safeguard.
Exactly. It's all, we focus a lot on process.
Right.
We talk about that all the time internally when we're having our discussions, privileged lawyer client conversations, if you will.
Yeah.
A lot of them focus on our process. And I think the problem is some title agents don't focus enough on their process.
Mhm.
And so they do things one way this day and they do things a different way another day.
Right.
And there's no consistency in their approach to their
Sure.
business. And we've seen that a few times and you can pick up on it, relatively easily.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But sometimes it happens late in the closing.
Right.
Certainly.
And if we haven't identified it early, that's where, we run into our potential snags.
And if you're a real estate investor, the point here is that if you're using a different title company for every transaction you do, there might be, differences in the process for what you're saying. And so it might be a good idea to have an attorney on your side reviewing these documents. It's protection, right? It's an extra layer.
It is. And, there's always this common misconception, I think, especially like Caleb was saying earlier, because we're not an attorney state for title. There's always this misconception that if you go to an attorney, it's going to slow you down,
Right.
or it's going to cause you additional cost.
Yeah.
Right.
There may be a little additional cost, but if you find the right attorney that you can develop a relationship with,
Yeah.
I would be very shocked if you wouldn't be able to get to an agreement with your lawyer on, some type of a fixed fee arrangement for document review or title review, so that you're not worried about, every time I pick up the phone and call him on this deal, it's an hourly charge.
Sure.
Or, if he
Good point.
reads one title commitment this day and two the next day, I'm worried about how much time it's going to take.
Yeah.
If you have that it's all about a relationship. If you have the relationship with that person, in my opinion, it's going to save you a lot of hassle in the long run, and it's going to pay dividends.
Big time. We talk about team all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like attorney is a part of that team. Having
Right.
your attorney, your title agent, your mortgage broker, your, inspectors and contractors, like the attorney's a crucial part of that team.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found too, we collaborate very well. And with you specifically, I know the attorneys get the mantra of being deal killers at times.
Yeah.
But, for you, I know you haven't been. You've helped make deals for us. And I think it's important for you. How have you found the way to collaborate with your team, to collaborate with title companies and independent, companies like DKC Lending?
That's a great question. I think, to me, I try to approach every transaction from the standpoint of how do we get from A to B, A at being the starting of the deal,
Mhm.
B being the closing, let's say, with the least amount of room for error,
Okay.
while still diligently protecting my client's interest, right?
Okay.
So what I mean by that is, if you're meeting a title agent or a lawyer on the other side for the first time, pick up the phone and call them.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Tell them, here's what we're going to do, rather than, send 4 or 5 emails and wait for a response, because you really don't know who's on the other side of that email until you get into the process.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. Now, that might not always be possible, right? Because there's only so many hours in your day.
Right.
And, sometimes, particularly our transactions are moving fast.
Oh, yeah.
But if we don't know this title agent, just as an example, that's a good way to start.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone, call them, talk to them, get to know who they are.
Yeah.
Explain the situation. one thing that we find is that when we make an introduction to a title agent, and by the time I'm talking to them on your behalf, your team has already reached out and they already know who the lender is.
Right.
That's helpful, obviously.
Yeah.
But by the time I make my introduction, sometimes they're nervous because a lot of these are cash deals on the contract.
Yeah.
And they say, "Oh, now we have a loan involved. I didn't realize this was a loan transaction." What that means is it's more work for the title agent.
Right.
Because now they have to update their commitment, update the closing statement, add our fees. And we try to streamline the process by sending them one email.
Yeah.
With all the fees, everything's included, all the page counts for our documents.
Yep.
Just the little details. Having closed transactions myself, I just know what I would appreciate receiving.
Yeah.
If I was in that person's shoes.
And the page count, even as an example, that helps because how many pages determines what the recording costs is. And so you're just streamlining that for them.
They can get that closing statement dialed in immediately.
Yeah.
With the exact page counts, and we don't have to renegotiate the closing statement 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
So just little things like that help the process.
And they're a little bit, when then you say they're nervous that a lender's coming in, they're not used to a lender coming in and being able to close within 24 or 48 hours either.
That's exactly right. Most of them have had, terrible experiences with these situations before.
Yeah.
And lenders that can't move fast, that can't cooperate, that don't have a team in place like you guys have, that are able to field these questions and answer them quickly.
Find the answers too. A lot of the times, even if we don't have it, you got to go find it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, we did a deal. I think Caleb negotiated the terms Wednesday night and Thursday morning, finalized them, got the term sheet over to you. You had docs prep by Thursday afternoon. We closed Friday. And it's not like we didn't have anything else going on. We had 7 closings on Friday.
Yeah.
So just to slide one. So when you have the right processes and you have the right team, you're able, and fee structures and things predetermined, you're able to move quickly. And that can, title agents, I think, are always pleasantly surprised after they get the first email. They're a little concerned. They get the second email from David or Marta, and they're like, "All right, we can make this happen."
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, and again, going back to the earlier comment that Caleb made, I mean, that's how you develop your relation. Everything's a relationship, and over time, it's what's your credibility, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So your relationship is important. If people know who you are, and then if they've heard your name before, because in the industry you're known to perform.
Yeah.
Right.
That's key.
Right.
Yep.
If the lender's able to perform, especially in these quick situations, everybody's going to jump on board and get the job done.
Yeah.
That's what I find.
And I think it's really important for people to understand too, especially with a group like ours, that we care about each party.
Yeah.
It's, although that we have our jobs to do and our responsibilities, it's important for people to really understand that we're here to protect everybody and everybody's best interest, and we have our agendas, of course, but it's important that the transaction is done properly.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, it's almost, in my opinion, a partnership. Now it's not a partnership legally between the borrower and lender. Mm-hmm. But a good loan should feel like a partnership in some senses.
For sure. Agreed.
Yeah.
You should be helping the borrower succeed as the lender.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously there's a relationship where they're helping the lender.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be a win-win at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And, each party has a certain role to play. And as long as the borrower communicates with the lender, gives them information that's accurate and plays by the rules, so to speak,
mm-hmm.
everything should be relatively seamless.
Yeah.
And then we can take over and that's where, with the assistance of the attorney or, with the loan officers and your processing team, we basically can run the transaction very seamlessly once all the pieces are in place.
Yeah.
And we can get into some more about that, but once the entity's formed, once the operating agreement's prepared, once all the corporate organizational documents are ready, from that point to closing, it doesn't have to be long.
No.
It can be a very quick process.
It can be very quick. I think that's a good segue to kind of title insurance and lien searches. I think that's a hot topic right now. A lot of real estate investors, I'm not sure they're quite understanding title insurance and what that means and what the limits are, and then why an attorney may want to review title insurance and then lien searches. And sometimes we do holdbacks, and maybe we can kind of jump into that part of the business.
And then quick claims versus warranty deeds, things like that.
Exactly.
Sure.
So from a very high level, title insurance is what you are going to obtain as an investor if you're buying property to have some level of comfort that you are the actual owner of that real estate.
Yep.
So when you purchase property, let's say you were buying an investment property for $400,000, you're going to obtain a title policy called an owner's policy, ensuring that your deed is properly executed, recorded, and therefore you are the owner of fee simple of the real estate. And that policy allows you to make a claim on the policy if there was an issue that was not properly handled by the closing agent or by anybody prior to your ownership. So
any claims or anything like that.
Exactly.
Right?
So just as an example, let's say you took title to the property this year, okay, in 2024. And 2 years ago, your seller bought it, okay, but there was an issue with that closing that didn't somehow, that was not picked up on your title commitment. You would still have title insurance to cover that potential claim.
Exactly.
Because whatever's in your commitment is all that you're responsible for remedying.
Right.
Okay. And it's like anything else. There's human error in any process, in any business.
Oh, yeah.
And in title, the human error comes in through examination of the public records. Right. And what the title commitment shows us is what documents have been recorded against that property historically. So if there was something that was missed during that examination, but you have a policy issued, you can make a claim and the title company will defend that claim.
Yep.
So it is absolutely
really
critical
important
as an investor that you always have title insurance.
Absolutely.
I mean,
even on a cash transaction.
Even on a cash transaction, it is so worth paying that premium.
Big time.
To make sure you have the ability to make a claim if there's an issue, because you can't control the title agent's process. You don't know who they are, how knowledgeable they are.
Sometimes you can't even see. Sometimes an issue could happen after you've left the closing table.
Correct.
It could be how it was recorded,
That's
and
right.
that has nothing to do with you, but
That's exactly. So we have something in the industry called the gap. Okay. The gap is the passage of time, and time and title is our enemy.
Okay.
Right? Because things get recorded.
Yep.
And the order of recording and the time of recording matters.
Yeah, a lot.
So the gap, as we call it in the industry, is the time between the day you sign your paperwork at the closing table and the day the deed or the mortgage gets recorded.
Yep.
And there could be something that hits the public records in that gap.
The lien, the HOA.
And by the way, there's no hard and fast rule that requires, at least in the state of Florida, some states do have this requirement, but there's no hard and fast rule on how long the title agent has to record those documents. I've seen sloppy title agents take up to a month to record,
which is terrifying if you're the lender or somebody else on that title. I mean,
and I would say that is certainly that is not exercising the typical standard of care.
Yeah. What do you think the standard is? 48, 72 hours? Something
I would say it depends on the county. Some counties literally might take a week because they're that backlogged.
Yeah.
So we record electronically now. Most counties, I think almost every county in Florida now offers that service.
Okay.
But most will record within 24 to 72 hours.
Okay.
But again, that requires that the title agent submit them.
Sure.
Time.
Yeah.
And people get sick and have family emergencies and everything else in between, right?
Yeah.
Or the file sits on someone's desk and it simply gets overlooked.
We've seen files get lost.
Yeah.
I mean, like literally
files.
whole entire loan packages
Notes.
gone.
Yeah,
Or just
yeah.
title agent can't find it. It was on the desk. Now it's gone. Tons of papers piled up, thrown away. And then
we're a paper, we're a very much a paper focused business. If you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And like I said earlier, I don't think it'll be a long time before we're paperless completely.
Yeah. Stop killing trees.
So, paper can be lost. It's
Right.
just, there's no other way to say it. But obviously you do everything you can to prevent those situations.
Yeah.
But as an investor, right, if I were buying that property and I don't control the process of that title agent, I'm going to make sure I have title insurance.
It's too much money at risk on these deals. And, it's such a small cost, you can protect yourself to such a high level.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, there's essentially the same policy for the lender. It's called the lender's policy.
Mhm.
And that is typically will always cover the loan amount. So same thing, we get insurance for the title
Yep.
for up to our loan amount.
Exactly. And just as a kind of an aside to that point, the borrower has to pay for the loan policy that the lender is going to receive no matter what. I
Yep.
mean, I have never heard of a single lender that will not require a loan policy
Yep.
for the reasons we just discussed and for more reasons.
Sure.
So you're already paying the premium for that policy.
Okay.
Fraud, all those other things we talked about.
You can get in Florida what's called a simultaneous issue rate, which means you're only paying basically for one policy, even though two are issued, the owners and the loan. And so for a minimal charge on the simultaneous issuance, it can be, generally less than $500, normally more like $200 to $300
Mhm.
for the simultaneous issue.
Yeah, that's great.
You might as well get an owner's policy.
Yeah.
Because your lender is going to require a loan policy. So it really does not make sense to go without it.
Yeah.
And like we've said, there are just so many different ways that you could lose a significant investment
Yeah, exactly.
without it.
And for those minimal costs, I mean, real estate professionals should negotiate the best possible deal to just cover those costs so they're protected.
Correct. And again, if you're an investor, develop these relationships with a title agent that you like, that that you feel like is knowledgeable.
Yep.
Though that relationship and the small amount of time you invest to make that relationship matter, that will pay dividends over the course of your.
It's great
career.
advice. It's great advice. So let's talk about lien searches next, then, if we could, because we know we buy with cash and we do get owner's policies on all of our purchases.
Mhm.
Lien searches, on the other hand, not everybody gets. From what I see, I'm curious to see how many transactions that you're looking at, how many actually get lien searches on a cash transaction.
And people make exceptions to them.
Obviously, lenders, we require them, but we make exceptions, like you said.
Yeah. So a lien search is, in my opinion, is critical for two reasons. Obviously, so there are generally four things that appear on the lien search, right? And there are a variety of service providers that offer them. They all tend to have the same four things: real estate taxes,
Mhm.
okay, which those are available publicly, easily, anyways.
Mhm.
But it summarizes it on one page.
Yeah.
Real estate taxes. Second would be assessments.
Utilities or
Well, special assessments, let's say, or anything that is just on top of the ad valorem real estate taxes.
Yep.
And then, utilities, water, sewer, gas, etc. And then the fourth would be permits.
Yep.
So,
which would include code enforcement, would you say?
correct.
Yeah.
Actually, yes. So five.
Five. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess you could put assessments in with
they're
tax-
almost the same.
Put assessments in with taxes because they're normally the same. But so let's talk about each of those. Taxes. Everybody knows that in Florida, Florida does not have a state income tax. Real estate is heavily taxed in the state of Florida. That's generally where Florida, the Florida government makes its revenue.
Sure.
So taxes are important. We pay taxes in Florida in arrears. And what that means is in 2024, you will not pay a tax bill till the fall.
Mhm.
Okay. Technically, your
November
tax bill
1st.
is not due until the following spring.
March 31st.
Yes, exactly. April, March,
Yep.
end of March, beginning of April. It's not due till then, but you will get a credit of 1%. You'll get a discount rather of 1% per month for every month you pay early.
Yep.
Okay. So again, just using 2024 as an example, you'll get a trim notice, usually in August, which will tell you what your expected tax bill is.
Yep.
And then you'll get the tax bill usually in October, and the taxes are due September or October. Taxes are then due
November 1st.
They can be paid for the first time in November.
Cool.
And they're finalized. The trim notice becomes a final tax bill. Then you get the
Then
tax
it doesn't
bill.
change.
It doesn't change from there.
Okay.
Now, what will happen is you will get a 1% discount per month if you pay it either in November, December, January, or
Yep.
February.
And then
So most people take advantage of the full 4% discount
yeah.
and they pay it in November.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on the delinquency side of that, if I could, it would be the concern if you're a real estate investor is really at the 3-year mark of delinquent taxes.
right.
Because that's when, so if you miss 1 tax bill, you're accruing late fees, right? You miss 2, you are still accruing late fees. You miss 3, you go to a tax deed auction and you could
Right.
potentially lose your
your
deed
entire property based on non-payment.
at the 3-year
And
mark. So
that's-
very important to know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't want to get more than a year behind on taxes, no matter what, because then
Sure.
there are additional costs and charges. But it certainly that's something I know you guys track internally because it's important.
Very.
The lender could lose out, the owner could lose out. It's a critical
Yeah, we'll step in
critical
and
date.
we'll step in and pay all 3 tax bills before we let the borrower before we let them lose the
Correct.
property.
Yep. So that's taxes. Now code enforcement, going to that specifically.
Yeah, that's a big one.
We get a lot of those.
Code enforcement items, those come up on the lien search,
Yep.
which is why we like to see lien searches for closings. And they may not be a title matter yet. And I say yet because they will arise to the level of a title matter once a judgment has been entered.
Okay.
So a code enforcement case involves usually a couple of different steps. You normally get a notice that says your property's non-compliant with certain provisions of the code.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
Some
That's
examples are like some overgrown grass,
Yeah.
Correct.
tarps on roofs, your dog bit a neighbor, anything like that.
Yeah.
There could be any number of reasons from that particular land development code or the code for that municipality.
Yeah.
And if you're non-compliant, you'll get a notice. And some people, unfortunately, disregard them. Those are important notices.
Yes.
Okay. It's like anything else in the legal process. You have due process, right?
Right.
So you have the ability to go to a hearing
Mhm.
and tell the authorities why the notice that you received is incorrect.
Yep.
In other words, why the property is compliant.
Yep.
Right.
And state your case.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't need a lawyer for that. You can do it on your own.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're complicated. It's probably better off, that you retain a lawyer for
Sure,
that
right.
hearing. But let's say you're walking through the process and you're gonna report that the property is compliant.
Mhm.
The code enforcement officer will come back out. They'll examine the property. They'll say, "Yep, you've done everything you need to do. Property's compliant." A lot of times they'll waive the fees.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you're proactive and you get ahead of things.
Yep.
The issues that we run into and why the lien searches are so critical are the times where people do not get ahead of these cases and the fines accrue. And sometimes, they can be up to $250 a day
For your grass not
for the grass not being.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a huge misconception for people. They don't realize it is a daily charge, not a fixed charge.
It's
So
a
those
daily
penalties-
charge.
And we've seen like $100 fines accrue to $30,000 assessments.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so what happens is all throughout the process of that code enforcement case, going through the hearings and going through all the notices that have to be provided, which give you many, many opportunities
Mhm.
to remedy this.
Yeah.
Once that case is completed and you have not complied with the code requirements and with the case, then it becomes a situation where now we have a title issue.
Now it's like a lien.
Now they can put a lien on the property, which can also then be foreclosed essentially, and the property can be taken
Yep.
Mhm.
from the individual or from the corporation or LLC that owns it by virtue of non-payment of the judgment.
Imagine
Yeah.
not cutting your grass and losing your $500,000 property.
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot that has to happen
Sure.
to get to that point.
Sure.
But if you're in a situation where the prior owner did something wrong and this wasn't fixed at your closing, Now you're on the hook.
Could be on the end of the line too. It could have been ongoing for 3 years.
You'd have to go after that seller.
Mhm.
So it gets very, very complicated if you don't get ahead of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, we have required, part of our process is that we require lien searches on every closing.
Yep.
Mhm.
And just a across the board requirement. They do take some time to have performed,
Yep.
right? So that is a little bit of a pain point for fast closings.
Yeah.
But we require them, and for various reasons, that has saved a lot of transactions.
Oh yeah.
Over the course of the years we've been working together.
Big time. I was going to say, go ahead.
No, I mean, I just think it's important, at least what people can get out of this is we're looking and we're assessing so much that can go wrong for our clients. From the legal side, title side, the integrity of the real estate, from everything, their LLC structure and the corporate structures. It's a lot of value that you get from having the right organization helping you. And I think that's one of the goals from us is helping all of our clients to achieve that and keep the protection, because the goal is not just to make money, but to protect these assets for the longevity, for the future of your families.
And even when we buy with cash, when you and I are purchasing, we're still getting the lien search on these cash purchases, even when it's not required, because you want to know what's on the title or what could hit you at some point. You want to know what remedies you need to procure.
I mean, how many times at the auction step have people bought and they've come to us for lending after not having the proper title reports and doing the proper research? They come to us, hey, we have this property, it's free and clear. I bought it cash at the auction steps. We pull up the title reports. Well, actually, it's not free and clear.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, it's a mess.
We talked about, so we'll talk about exemptions that we've allowed and why we've allowed them, and then the ability to negotiate some of these debts down. So we've seen, go ahead.
Permits. You want to talk about permits first from that lien search?
Yes, go ahead.
This is another one, right?
Yeah.
The same thing.
Same thing. It's not going to show up in title. The lien search will find permits that are either that have not been closed by a contractor that didn't order a final inspection, which happens all the time. I hate to say that, but all the time. Or permits that have fees that are unpaid.
Yeah.
And so you'll buy the property, and if you didn't have a lien search performed, you'll go to pull a new permit and start your work, because obviously you're buying the property to either rehab it or do something to it to improve it.
Yep.
And that's why it's an investment. You might be shut down from having a new permit issued because you have to fix the old permits first.
Yeah.
And so knowing that there are permit issues prior to closing will save you as an investor dollars and time.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
I was gonna say,
time is money. So, either way, you're saving yourself money.
for sure. And some of it's, like you said, actual dollars or fees. And imagine trying
And the
to track
seller should
down.
pay those.
And the seller should, but now you've assumed it. And some of those,
You've
honestly,
closed.
Now
Assume the money's gone,
it's gone.
and the seller you'll never hear from again.
Ever. And the roofer, by the way, that's the more difficult part. Now you got to find the seller's roofer.
Yeah.
Good luck. So
And we've seen some where you actually have to have an engineer come back out.
Yeah.
I mean, these permit closures can be complicated, even for minor, what I would consider to be minor jobs.
Yeah.
And so way, way better off having these fixed prior to closing.
Yeah.
And so DKC lending, I'll give you a couple circumstances where we've, waived a lien search because speed has to close, and we've done held backs, and we've kind of mitigated the risk through lending processes. But so an example of that could be that you have a tarp on a roof and the roof is dilapidated and somebody's buying that asset, right? A new investor.
Mm-hmm.
The current seller doesn't have the cash to fix the roof and settle the code enforcement complaint.
Mm-hmm.
So the new buyer needs to settle that by fixing the roof. Well, he was probably going to do it anyways. It's part of his renovation schedule. So he plans on renovating and replacing the roof, but he cannot resolve that at the time of closing. So we've done a holdback for that. We think that the code enforcement could be this much, and we make a judgment call on that, and we'll hold back those funds at title company until the borrower fixes the roof, calls in the city inspection, and clears the code enforcement issue.
Yeah.
And that's where, to brag on you guys for a moment, if I could, that's where the knowledge that you have of the repairs and the work that's being done by your borrowers is critical, right? Because you're not just a lender. you're also investors, and
Yeah.
you also understand the process that your borrowers are going through. So you can identify from the review of those permits
Yeah.
that what work needs to be done,
Mhm.
what's the approximate cost of this work,
Yep.
what will I need to hold back to secure the
Timelines.
loan, how long will this take, and work through it with your borrower. And that's why that partnership, not a true partnership, just, like we
Yeah.
said earlier,
Yeah.
I got to clarify that.
Not a legal partnership.
We don't have a legal partnership, but it's a lender-borrower relationship. But that you guys are working together
Right.
to solve the same problem.
We want to be
And
deal makers.
that's it.
Yeah.
And so we, like David said, we have done that a number of times, and it has proven to be a great tool, to allow the closing to happen, allow the seller to be removed from the picture,
Yeah.
because sometimes they're the problem,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and allow that borrower to move on with the project.
And we'll put timelines on it. You don't have a year to put your roof on. You got 60 days perhaps. But yeah, it's a practical approach is what we like to call it. And we want to make deals happen. So,
Yep.
So cool. So that's really good knowledge, I think, from a title and lien search perspective. I was going to change it up a little bit and maybe come back to the question earlier about, technological and industry changes that you've seen, just because we've talked about this offline and it's interesting. And so a loaded question, but maybe some technological or, changes in the real estate law practice, and then maybe where you think it might go with the introduction of AI and things like that.
So just as an example, the e-recording we talked about earlier,
Yes.
electronic recording.
Mhm.
When I first started, now I sound like I'm dating myself. It has been 15 years. We would literally walk packages to the recording office in the county, especially if it was Hillsborough or Pinellas, because it was local.
Sure.
But you would have to send other ones out in
couriers
FedEx or
Yeah.
with courier.
Mhm.
And so literally that's how the process was run back then. You would physically walk them through, and they would put a sticker on the document telling you the book and page of the official records book.
Yeah.
Take it back with you right then and there at the time too.
Yeah.
Like they just
They'd
right
put
there.
the sticker on, you take the docs back.
Yeah, you're done.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you can still do that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I
Do that
mean,
with like NOCs. a
people
lot
do
and
that
stuff.
for NOCs all the time,
Yeah.
notice of commencement, because you want it issued.
Right away.
But we now submit all of our recordings electronically. I think there was recently, it was a couple years ago, I saw one county, let's say, on the list of counties that wasn't offering the service yet, but I think now they all do in Florida.
Okay.
So literally from your desk anywhere in the state, or frankly anywhere in the world, you could submit a PDF of a signed document to be electronically recorded in any county in Florida,
Pretty awesome.
which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it really has been a huge benefit in the real estate practice.
I can imagine what your time shift was on just
Less letters, less packages coming in and out of the office, less room for error with
Yeah.
losing documents.
Yeah.
Now the key is, and this is again going back to some of the fraud issues, you have to have the original in your possession to electronically record it.
Okay.
And obviously there's room for error. So the introduction of technology always, in my opinion, leaves room for error.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it leaves room for unscrupulous actors to take advantage.
Sure.
So, you're not allowed or supposed to record electronically unless you're physically in possession of that document. I would guess that a lot of people break that rule.
Yeah.
Not regularly, I would hope, but something tells me there are people breaking that rule.
Were you attending more closings to have the originals in hand right then and there? Or
Well, what we would do, yes. I mean,
it's
yes. I
probably
mean,
more common at least?
when I started practicing, I would say there were more face-to-face closings, we would call them.
Yeah.
Where the buyer seller would both be in the same room.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
That hardly
don't do that
happens anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it still happened a bit before COVID. I
Yeah.
think COVID probably was the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It happens occasionally. You still have some old school sellers that want to physically be there to
Sure.
receive a check or to wait for their wire to hit the account.
No, plenty of
It
those.
happens.
Mhm.
But it's rare. The advent of the electronic recording and the documents being signed remotely, with that now being the standard, a lot of the closings are happening a day after they usually would have happened, right? Because the closing agent should wait for the originals to arrive. So if the originals are signed in New York, you know, by the borrower, and they have to be shipped to that closing agent's office in Florida, well, technically you should not be recording or dispersing funds until you have possession of that original set of documents.
Bingo.
And that's something we focus on heavily with our title agents we work with, because, you know, like I said earlier, we don't know their process. And we have to have a somewhat of a level of distrust of the process that they use until they're proven to be trustworthy.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And that's not to say that, you know, we can't work with them on these things, but we just have to, we need to know where our documents are.
Exactly.
Your note and your mortgage and all these documents that are signed, you know, we need to know the chain of custody.
The originals are so important.
Yep.
And we have a process internally of tracking those originals down and chasing them. And now even I think about how much our satisfaction recording process has sped up with the e-recordings too.
Yeah. We've started doing all those electronically now. And so you can deliver those to your borrowers in much more, a much quicker timeline than it used to be with sending them out.
We were waiting like 8, 9, 10 months for some that were sent out recording, and like we don't have them back.
I think some of these smaller counties, their recording offices with the e-recording becoming prevalent, have really slimmed down their staff. I think I don't know that for a fact, but it just seems like things are taking a lot longer to record the old-fashioned.
Yeah. I guess the remote notary, just to hone on that for a second, because it's pretty new. Borrowers aren't really exactly sure of what's allowed, what's not allowed. So that remote online notary, right? That's the RON, we call it. What does that look like? Because can you just, you know, get a notary and be on a phone call with somebody? You know, what does that look like for borrowers?
It's kind of a little bit of it's a new thing, obviously. I think, I don't want to speak out of turn, so this may not be 100% correct, but I believe the legislature passed that bill right before COVID.
Okay.
I think it was right before COVID happened that RON became effective. It may have been a year before, but it was right around the time that, so it was a timely piece of legislation, if you think about it, because
coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe.
Eye roll.
But anyways, it was helpful during COVID, particularly because people could sign from the comfort of their house with a RON. Now, it doesn't mean that any notary that's a notary in the state of Florida can sign electronically.
Right?
You have to have a qualification, and you have to have taken a course, and there are certain things you have to log. You know, in a logbook, basically.
I think it's like a Zoom requirement.
There are video requirements.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. And so we would only accept that, and we ask this all the time, if it's done by a certified remote online notarization notary.
So that's a certificate that borrowers can ask for.
I think it's a certificate.
I think you're right. Yeah.
There's a special, there's gotta be a certificate they can provide. But it's a special qualification. Not every notary is one.
And do all title companies accept it? I think some title companies don't accept
Some
it.
are a little bit more lenient than others on accepting them.
Okay. So you may want to just check with your title company first to just make sure that that's a possibility.
Correct.
And your lender. I mean, we've accepted our RON signatures. Not all lenders accept them either. I mean, we've had borrowers that were out of country and had to sign in a different country. And so it becomes, it's a handy tool.
It is.
And how does that affect the title insurance? Is that more liability for them? Is it more costly, or how does that affect
Well,
them?
I think it again, like any new technology, it adds an element of people being able to
risk
to take advantage, you know, of the situation. So there is more risk, probably, I would think.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the underwriters have looked at this. You know, the title underwriters, by the way, just to give everyone kind of a little bit of a deeper dive there, the title underwriter is the company that issues the policy through its agent, right? So when we talk about closing agents, the closing agent is it's almost identical to you getting, you know, homeowners or car insurance.
Right.
You go to an agent mostly.
Yeah. Great comparison.
Not directly to the insurance carrier. The title company is the carrier right? In that context,
Mhm.
that's the company that issues the policy that takes on the risk.
Got it.
They have an agency relationship with their agent. So there's a contract that
Yep.
that agent has with the carrier. And so I think the title companies have probably done a lot of investigating on that.
Yeah, essentially underwrite the risk
To
associated.
underwrite the risk of it. Yeah. And again, because there's a certificate and there's all these requirements, there's a lot more liability. I'm sure the Ron, I'm sure the E&O coverage for
Yeah,
those
like
remote
to the
notaries,
notary itself.
I'm sure it's a more
Themselves.
expensive policy for
Sure,
them.
sure.
So there are probably some, safeguards in place, but there's nothing certain.
Yeah.
And those notaries you see like in a fraud case we've seen, or even a suggested fraud case, whether it's
Yeah.
true or not. I mean, the notary is typically one of the first witnesses,
Exactly.
in the case to say,
Mhm.
hey, how was this signed? Who was there? Did you
Exactly.
verify
Mm-hmm.
who the signers were, et
Exactly.
cetera? So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, I mean, go ahead.
I wanted to kind of ask you if you had a minute, because I know you've sat in several seats when it comes to representing banks, representing private lenders like ourselves, or representing individuals. Where's the excitement more for you, or what did you love more about representing each of those?
Question.
That's a great question. I mean, I tell people occasionally the complicated transactions are the most fun, right?
Okay.
Because it's like anything you do every day, right? If you're preparing for a marathon, let's say, right?
Right.
You do certain things every day that are just pure repetition, that are just
Right.
a part of your normal day-to-day job.
Right.
And so those become just, the standard operating procedures, let's say.
Mhm.
But the complicated transactions give you the opportunity to really test your ability. And so to me, that's like the race, right? That's like the marathon runner's race.
Yeah.
He's training every day, but then on race day, you're putting yourself through the paces.
Yeah.
And so, obviously some are less complicated than others,
Right.
but the complicated ones are the ones that I enjoy the most. And I think it's because, I've been doing it 15 years.
Yeah.
Like we said, and,
We'll keep feeding you complicated ones.
Yeah.
Too.
I'm happy to do them.
We've had our fair share.
We've had our fair share.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think there's probably an episode 2 here coming out sometime. We're going to have you back on again for sure.
Love to do it.
There's so much good information here to cover, and we deep dove into some really good topics today with title insurance, lien searches, fraud. I mean, those are really good topics that make borrowers and investors better at what they do. Right. And so I think I can think of a couple good topics that we'll talk about next time, but we hit the hour mark today. So we'll wrap up today. So
thank you guys. Appreciate being here.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks for tuning in again at How to Make Money with Hard Money. Please like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube and Apple Podcasts.